You hummed softly to yourself, stirring the ingredients for breakfast while the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. The blender whirred as you prepared Jungkook's protein shake, knowing how seriously he took his fitness. Jungkook was the type of man who rarely missed a day of exercise, even with his demanding role as a mafia leader. He had left early for his morning jog, and you had been waiting for him to return so you could share breakfast together. Hearing the front door open, you glanced over and saw him drop onto the couch, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He looked exhausted, but somehow still incredibly composed, his face calm as he began unlacing his shoes. You quickly poured the water. Jungkook, you called softly, holding out the glass. As he looked up, a slight nod acknowledged your presence. He took the shake from you with a curt, "Thank you." His tone was cold as always, but polite. You couldn't help but feel that familiar sting, wishing he would show even a hint of warmth. "Your breakfast will be ready soon," you said softly, lingering there as he drank. When he finished, he looked at you and asked, "Have you had your breakfast?" "No," you replied. "I was waiting for you so we could eat together." He nodded briefly, then stood up, walking to the kitchen to place the empty glass in the sink. Before heading upstairs to shower, you watched him disappear, feeling a mix of emotions. It had been 3 months since your marriage, yet it felt as though this marriage wasn't built on love, it was more a transaction, an agreement between your father and Jungkook for mutual protection. Both of you had painful pasts that made intimacy feel like a risk, a door. And although you respected his boundaries, you would found yourself falling for him little by little. His quiet respect for you, his ability to listen without judging, his care in small actions, these things drew you to him even if he kept you at distance. As you finished setting the table, you heard Jungkook's footsteps coming downstairs. He walked into the dining room, his expression as unreadable as ever, his usual aura of calm authority surrounding him. You gave him a small smile which he didn't return, but he nodded in acknowledgement before sitting in his chair. You sat beside him, close enough to feel his presence, but far enough to avoid crowding him. With practiced movements, you served breakfast for both of you. Jungkook was busy scrolling through his phone, checking emails and messages, so you didn't expect much conversation. It was typical. Your breakfast times were often quiet, each of you lost in your own thoughts. When Jungkook's voice broke the silence, you looked up surprised. "Yes?" "Jungkook, have you prepared the presentation?" he asked, glancing at you briefly before returning his gaze to his phone. You nodded. "Yes, Jungkook, I have prepared everything and sent it to you by email. Let me know if you need any changes or if there is anything else I should add." Jungkook shook his head, still focused on his screen. "No need. I trust you." A small, pleased smile tugged at your lips. He trusted you. That simple statement warmed your heart in a way you hadn't expected. Even though he rarely showed his feelings, knowing that he had faith in your work meant a lot. You had been working as his secretary for gaining experience in preparation for eventually managing your father's company. Despite his cold exterior, Jungkook never doubted your abilities. You took a bite of your food, glancing at him now and then, feeling content. The meal continued in comfortable silence until you suddenly felt something go down the wrong way. You choked, coughing and struggling to breathe. You gasped, trying to catch your breath. Jungkook reacted immediately. He reached for the glass of water and held it to your lips, gently patting your back as you drank, his touch surprisingly warm and reassuring. Once you had calmed down, he set the glass back on the table. "Are you alright?" he asked, his tone still cold but with a hint of concern. You nodded, your voice soft. "Yes, thank you, Jungkook." "It's okay, be careful," he said, returning to his breakfast, but you could feel his gaze lingering on you for a moment longer than usual. Feeling a wave of warmth from his subtle care, you glanced at him a few times during breakfast. A small smile on your lips. He didn't express his feelings openly. but his actions spoke louder than words. There was a hidden kindness in him, a side you rarely saw. After finishing the meal, you both gathered your things and headed outside where two sleek black cars were parked and ready. Jungkook's bodyguard stood nearby waiting for your instructions. Despite being married, you and Jungkook had decided to keep it private even from your colleagues at the office. It was something only your families and closest friends knew about, as there had been no media coverage of your wedding. To everyone else, you were simply his secretary and he was your boss. Jungkook looked at one of the guards and nodded in your direction. Make sure to drop Madam safely at the office. The guard nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. Jungkook turned to you, his gaze unreadable but focused. I'll see you at the office, he said before climbing into his car without another word. You nodded, watching as he settled into the passenger seat, his attention already shifting to the documents his assistant had handed him. You climbed into the other car, the driver waiting for you to settle in before he started the engine. As the car pulled away, you found yourself gazing out of the window, lost in thought. Even though Jungkook's behavior could be distant, he was still. The way he would taken care of you when you choked, his trust in your work, and his simple gesture of making sure you would arrive safely, all of these things painted a picture of a man who might be cold on the outside, but cared deeply in his own heart. The journey of the office was free, with you stealing glances at the car engine where Jungkook was seated. Despite the distance between you, there was a sense of closeness, a subtle connection that you couldn't quite explain. You had been only married for a few months, and while it was a marriage arranged through family ties, there was something real, something that went beyond mere obligation. You and Jungkook arrived at the office at the same time. Stepping out of your separate cars, you both approached the building entrance. The security guards bowed respectfully, acknowledging both of you. Jungkook gave a slight nod in response, maintaining his usual cold, distant demeanor, and you offered a polite smile before following him inside. As you walked through the office open space, the employees greeted Jungkook with a chorus of "Good morning, sir." His response was a brief "Good morning," said in a neutral tone, barely glancing their way. His expression remained the same, calm, focused, and as always, a little intimidating. Once Jungkook entered his cabin and closed the door, you could practically feel the tension in the office space ease. Several employees visibly relaxed, relieved that they could now chat freely without worrying about his intense presence. Among them were two employees, Sana and Nancy, who were quick to start a whispered conversation. Our boss is so handsome, Sana said dreamily to Nancy, glancing at Jungkook's closed door, but he never smiles. Nancy giggled. I know, it's like he's always frozen. I mean, I'm just waiting to see even a hint of a smile. Imagine if he laughed. Sana laughed along with her. Such a cool person. I don't know who would ever want to marry him. Whoever does would probably leave the next day. He has no romantic sense at all. The two of them giggled together, unaware of anything outside their bubble, until they heard sharp, steady voice interrupting them. I think you two don't need to worry about who he's marrying, he said, raising an eyebrow, holding a stack of files in your hands. Because he's not marrying either of you. Sana and Nancy instantly stopped laughing, snapping their heads in your direction with wide eyes. They jumped up from their seats, looking both surprised and a little guilty. Miss Vine, Sana stammered, trying to recover. We didn't see you there. Yes, it's me, you said firmly, your expression serious. Now what are you two doing? Nothing, Nancy replied quickly, her voice shaky. Nothing? He repeated, unimpressed. Does nothing mean you have completed last week's task? He raised an eyebrow, looking directly at them. The two women exchanged nervous glances before lowering their heads. No, ma'am, we haven't finished it yet, Sana admitted. You let out a small sigh, giving them a stern look. So, you two have all that dedication in the world to gossip about your boss but can't find the time to complete your work? They both dropped their gaze to the floor, mumbling apologies. We are sorry, they said quietly, looking genuinely embarrassed. Sit, you instructed, and next time try not to talk badly about anyone, especially not about someone who's giving you a paycheck every month. Now focus on your work. They nodded silently, still too embarrassed to meet your gaze. You shook your head slightly, turning away to leave. As you walked off, you overheard Sana whispering to Nancy, "Why does she feel like our boss's wife?" Sana murmured under her breath, clearly frustrated. "She's always ruining our mood." Hearing her words, you couldn't help but smirk, shaking your head in amusement. They had no idea just how right they were, and that made you feel a strange sense of pride as you continued on your way. When you returned to your desk, you settled down and began going through emails and organizing documents for the day. Jungkook had high expectations for his team and even more for you. Being both his wife and his secretary required a delicate balance. You had to ensure you were professional at all times, especially since none of your coworkers knew about your marriage. A few minutes later, you received an email notification from Jungkook asking you to bring a few reports to his cabin. You gathered the necessary files, took a deep breath, and headed to his office. "Come in," he called out, his voice as steady and cold as ever. You entered, walking over to his desk and placing the files in front of him. "Here are the reports you asked for, Jungkook," you said with a polite smile. He barely looked up as he accepted the files. "Thank you, Wine," he said, his tone impassive. As he flipped through the documents, you watched him for a moment, admiring the way he handled his work with such calm confidence. You were starting to understand his silence, his reserved nature. It was his way of protecting himself and everyone around him. Being a mafia leader required a lot of control, and you could see that he maintained that control in every aspect of his life. After a moment, he looked up, noticing you were still standing there. "Is there something else?" he asked, his voice softer but still guarded. You hesitated, then shook your head. "No, nothing. Just let me know if you need anything else." He nodded, his gaze holding yours for a brief second before he looked back at the reports. "I will." You turned and left his office, your mind replaying that small, quiet moment. There were times you wished things were different, that you could walk into his office and just talk, laugh, or even share lunch together. But you knew that his walls were up for a reason, and rushing him would only push him further away. Back at your desk, you sat and focused on your task, trying to brush off the ache in your heart. You were married to him, but sometimes it felt like he was still a stranger. Yet there was something about his small actions, the way he would make sure you were safe that morning, the way he would help you when you showed, that kept giving you hope. Hours passed as you worked, your daily filled with meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Occasionally, you would catch sight of Jungkook through the glass walls of his office, fully immersed in his work. You would never seen him break focus, not even once. You were by the coffee machine, carefully making 2 cups of coffee after receiving a text from Jungkook. "Bring 2 coffees, one for me, one for you." Just as you were about to finish, you heard a familiar "Hello, Ryan," he greeted in a raspy tone. You glanced up and saw Mr. Mike, one of the company board members. Your face fell instantly. You couldn't hide the irritation that flickered across your expression. Still, you forced a smile and greeted him. "Hi, Mr. Mike. What are you doing over here?" he asked, leaning a little too close. "I'm preparing coffee for the boss," he replied shortly, avoiding eye contact. "Oh, no, no, you shouldn't be doing that," he said with a sly smile. "Your smooth, delicate hand shouldn't be handling these things. Let me help you," he offered, reaching over and placing his hand over yours. Startled and uncomfortable, you immediately pulled your hand back, shooting him a serious look. "What are you doing, Mr. Mike?" you asked, keeping your voice firm. "Don't touch me without my permission." His expression changed, hardening. Clearly, he didn't appreciate your reaction. "Warning me, are you?" he said with a condescending smirk. "Do you want to live jobless in this life?" He sneered, his gaze still glued to you, and you could feel the dark intentions behind it. For months, you would put up with his uncomfortable stares and the way he always found excuses to be near you. You hadn't told Jungkook about it because you thought you could handle him, but today he would cross the line. He stood there silently, not wanting to escalate the situation, but then a sudden thought crossed your mind. Slowly you started to smirk, keeping your eyes fixed on him with a defiant look. Mike, what's with this smug look? He asked, looking irritated and a little confused. You raised your eyebrows and made a small gesture with your arms, signaling him to look behind him. Mr. Mike turned uncolored, drained from his face as he saw Jungkook standing there, his expression darkened and brooding. Mr. Jungkook, Jungkook took a few calm steps forward, his eyes fixed on Mike. I was wondering why so many women in this office would resign without any clear reason, he said coldly. Now I understand. Mike swallowed nervously, his gaze darting between you and Jungkook. Mr. Jungkook, you cannot believe this woman, he stammered desperately, trying to salvage the situation. Jungkook chuckled, a dark menacing sound. Really? You think I will believe you over my own secretary? Just shut your dirty mouth and leave my office immediately. You are terminated. Mike's face twisted in anger and he glared at you before turning back to Jungkook. You'll regret this, he hissed. I'll make sure your company falls. If I'm not in this office, I'll go join one of your competitors and... Do you think you have a choice? Jungkook interrupted, his voice icy. No one will dare partner with you. I'm not just the CEO here. I'm a mafia leader. Everyone in this industry fears me. Your career, your life, as you know, it's over. Mike's face turned pale and he began to tremble. He tried to speak, but no words came out of his mouth. With his slight nod from Jungkook, two security guards appeared at the doorway, each grabbing one of Mike's arms. He struggled, but it was no use. They dragged him out of the office, his threats now reduced to pathetic, incoherent mumbling. As the office returned to its usual calm, you turned to Jungkook with a relaxed smile. Thank you, Jungkook. I didn't want to bother you with this, but he went too far today. Jungkook looked at you, a faint smirk on his lips. I should be the one thanking you, Wan. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known the real reason for the resignations. We need people who can trust here, not people like him. You smiled, feeling a warmth rise within you. I'm just glad you believe me. He nodded, his gaze softening for a brief moment. I trust you, Wan, always. Your heart skipped a beat at his words, and for a moment you felt a rare sense of closeness to him. But Jungkook's expression quickly returned to its usual seriousness as he glanced down at the coffees. Now let's go to my office, he said, gesturing for you to follow him. We still have a lot to discuss. You nodded, picking up the coffees and following him down the hallway. As you walked side by side, you couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Jungkook's silent support meant more to you than any words could express. It was late in the evening and you noticed Jungkook looking slightly nervous. He rarely ever showed signs of unease, so this was different. You knew he was waiting for an important client, a potential partner for a big deal, just as you were about to ask if he needed. A smooth, confident voice came from behind the door. May I come in? Jungkook sat up straighter, his expression immediately shifting to his usual composed self. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s, elegantly dressed and exuding confidence. She was Kang Sujin, a name you recognized instantly. Sujin was a well-known businesswoman in the industry, powerful, respected, and definitely someone who carried herself with style. You couldn't help but be impressed by her aura as she entered the room, looking every bit like the influential figures she was. Hello, Mr. Jungkook, she greeted with a warm, almost too familiar smile as she walked up to his desk. Hi, Miss Kang Sujin, Jungkook replied politely, his tone cold and distant as usual. You couldn't help but notice her gaze lingering on Jungkook a little too long, eyeing him from head to toe. You suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable by the way she was looking at him, as if sizing him up more personally than professionally. You're looking deadly handsome, Sujin said with a wink, her smile turning sly. Jungkook simply replied thank you in his usual calm tone, showing no reaction to her flirtatious comment. As he was about to sit down, she stopped him. Wait, we haven't had a proper welcome hug yet. Before Jungkook could respond, she stepped over to his side and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. It was more than a simple professional greeting. It felt too intimate, and you couldn't hide the irritation that flickered across your face. You had heard she was a highly professional businesswoman, but this behavior was surprising and professional. Jungkook hugged her back, though barely touching her, keeping his arms stiff and distant. He quickly pulled away as she let go, finally taking his seat. He sat down as well, crossing her legs and turning her attention back to him, though you noticed her eyes still lingered a bit too long. Jungkook cleared his throat and gestured toward you. This is Wine, my secretary. She'll be here to assist with any project notes or files we may need. Surgeon gave you a narrow look as if sizing you up. "Oh, secretary," she said in a dismissive tone, barely sparing you a nod. You could almost feel her thinking that you didn't belong there. It was clear from her attitude that she didn't like having you near Jungkook. She didn't say it outright. Jungkook, ignoring her look, sat forward and placed a folder on the table. "All right, Miss Surgeon. Shall we start discussing the project details?" But Sojin waved a hand, leaning back with a casual smile. "Come on, Jungkook. We are going to be business partners. No need for formalities. Just call me Sue," she said, her tone dripping with flirtation. "It's friendlier than all this formality." Jungkook, however, kept his tone firm. "I prefer to keep things professional, Miss Sojin. Let's stick to that." She looked slightly disappointed but nodded with a forced smile. "All right, Mr. Professional," she replied, clearly trying to mask her frustration. The discussion about the project began, but it quickly became clear that Sojin's focus was not on the project details. You caught her gaze shifting repeatedly to Jungkook's face, then to his chest, and even lingering on his hands as he pointed out different sections in the project folder. It was distracting, and you could feel your patience wearing thin. Finally, you couldn't hold back. Clearing your throat, you spoke up, keeping your tone polite but firm. "Excuse me, Miss Sachin," you said, leaning forward slightly. "Could you please concentrate on the project details instead of somewhere else that doesn't belong to you?" Sojin's smile vanished and she turned to glare at you. Her expression turned cold. She seemed taken aback by your straightforwardness, her eyes narrowing as if she couldn't believe you had spoken up. Her voice dripped with contempt as she spoke. "Jungkook, do we really need your secretary here?" she asked, her eyes never leaving yours. "I would prefer to discuss some personal matters with you alone. It would be better if she left us." Her eyes widened slightly in surprise at her bold request. She clearly wanted you gone, and you couldn't ignore the way she smirked, clearly thinking she had won. Jungkook glanced at you, then at Sojin, his expression unreadable. "All right, Wine," he said after a moment. "You can leave us for now." You nodded, fighting to keep your expression neutral as you stood up gathering the files. "Of course," you said politely, but your tone was colder than usual. As you walked past Sojin, you noticed the smug smile that spread across her face as she watched you leave. It was a silent victory for her, and she made no effort to hide it. Holding your head high, you walked out, refusing to give her the satisfaction of knowing you were bothered. Once outside the office, you took a deep breath, your fists clenching as you tried to calm down. Her blatant attempt to flirt with Jungkook and the way she dismissed you were beyond unprofessional. Still, you knew that Jungkook could handle her even if he didn't show it. You trusted him not to let her overstep any boundaries. You walked back to your desk, keeping an eye on the office door, hoping that meeting would be over soon. The minutes ticked by, and as you waited, you replayed the scene in your mind, feeling both frustrated and oddly protective. You stood there, fuming outside the cabin, your hands clenched into tight fists. "How dare she look at my husband like that?" you muttered angrily under your breath. The way Sojin had been eyeing Jungkook, so obviously flirting with him, while he clearly wasn't interested. It disgusted you. You had seen her glance at him like he was some kind of prize to be won, while all Jungkook did was respond with that cold, indifferent look of his. The nerve of that woman, she was clearly trying to make him her target, but no way you weren't going to let her get away with it. You could feel a hot rush of anger bubble up inside you. You wanted to storm back into the office and show Sojin exactly where she stood, but you knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. So instead, you took a deep breath and walked to the coffee machine, your thoughts still consumed by her actions. What was she thinking? You tried to calm yourself, but your mind kept replaying her inappropriate behavior. Grabbing a coffee tray, you set your jaw, determined to handle the situation in your own way. With every step, you imagined the look on Sojin's face when you walked in and put her in her place. That's right, you will teach her some respect, you thought, imagining how this would unfold. You knocked on the door lightly. "Excuse me, sir, may I come in?" You called out. Your voice was calm, but the anger simmered beneath it. "Come in, Wine." Jungkook's voice responded from inside. His voice was as cool as ever, but you could tell he was already dealing with the tension in the room. You stepped inside, your heart pounding with a mix of determination and frustration. When you entered, you found Sojin sitting on the chair opposite Jungkook, her body language far too comfortable. She was eyeing Jungkook with that same flirtatious smile, and it made your skin crawl. You silently walked over to the desk and placed the coffee cup on the table in front of her. She looked at the coffee, not even sparing you a glance. "What's the use of this? I didn't ask for it," she said dismissively, her tone sharp. You forced a smile, keeping your voice polite. "It's our honor to respect our clients," you replied cool. She shot you an irritated look, her eyes narrowing. "Well, I didn't ask for it, but fine," she said as she grabbed the coffee, but her hand stopped halfway to her lips. "Jungkook, why don't you have it?" she said, her voice oozing with a false sweetness as she pushed the coffee towards him. Jungkook, already looking uninterested, simply shook his head. "I don't want it," he said flatly. But Sojin wouldn't take no for an answer. "Oh, come on, Jungkook, just a little sip for me," she cooed, leaning forward slightly as if to pressure him into accepting the drink. Her tone had shifted into something more personal, something that made your stomach twist with irritation. "I said no, Sojin," Jungkook repeated, his tone colder this time, his patience clearly thinning. "Stop being so stiff," she pouted, leaning further and in her attempt to push the cup towards him, she knocked it over. The coffee spilled across the desk and he watched as it splashed onto Jungkook's shirt. "Oh no, I'm sorry, Jungkook," she exclaimed dramatically, feigning concern, though her eyes gleamed with mischief. She immediately moved to his side and reached for some tissues. "You should take your shirt off or it might burn your skin," she suggested almost too eagerly. You clenched your jaw, barely able to keep your anger in check. This was beyond inappropriate. Your fingers tightened around the edge of the door frame. Jungkook stood up, clearly frustrated but trying to stay composed. "I'll go clean up," he muttered, heading for the bathroom. You shot Sojin a glare before following him, but before you could leave the room, Sojin called out, "Where are you going?" She was practically sneering, unable to hide her irritation. Jungkook didn't even acknowledge her. "Fine, come here for a second," he called from the bathroom. You gave Sojin a smug look before responding. "Can't you hear? He's calling me." You smirked at her before walking into the bathroom, closing the door behind you. You found Jungkook standing near the sink, his shirt off, his broad chest exposed. He had already begun cleaning the spill, but there was a quiet tension in the air. "You okay?" you asked quietly, your anger melting into concern. "I'm fine," he said with a small smile, his expression softening as he looked at you. "But I have to ask you something." He handed you the wet shirt and you began raising it under the tap. You focused on the task at hand, but you could feel Jungkook's presence behind you, The space between you both felt charged, and you knew he was closer than usual. It wasn't until you felt his arms encircle you from behind that you froze. His warm chest pressed against your back, and his voice was low, teasing. Why are you jealous of Sojin? You blinked surprised as he was hugging you that too shirtless, but before you could answer, he continued, his breath warm against your ear. I saw it in your eyes. I didn't know you would love me this much. His voice was gentle, sincere. If I had known, I would have expressed my feelings sooner. You turned your head slightly to look at him in the mirror. Your reflection mirrored your confusion. Really? You asked, your voice a little shaky. You love me? Jungkook smiled, his eyes softening. Of course, I have loved you for a while now. I just didn't know how to show it. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, but I'm telling you now. I love you, Ryan. Tears sprinkled at the corner of your eyes as his words sank in. It was everything you had ever hoped for. After all the confusion, all the tension, he was finally opening up to you. I thought you would never love me, you admitted, your voice barely a whisper. Who wouldn't fall in love with someone as amazing as you? He said, cupping your face with his hands. I'm lucky that your ex lost you, and that fate brought us together. A smile tugged at your lips, and you leaned into his touch. You're saying all the right things. You teased, though your heart was full. Jungkook smiled too. I mean it, Wan. You don't need to worry about anything. I'm yours. Not Sojin, not anyone else. Only you. You felt a wave of pride and affection fill you. I'm glad, you whispered. I'm so glad. The sound of footsteps outside the bathroom door made you both pause. Jungkook's sharp eyes glanced toward the door, and you both knew who it was. Sojin was still lurking outside, burning with jealousy. You could practically feel the tension radiating from her. She knocked once, but Jungkook didn't hesitate. Miss Kang Sojin, he called, his voice cold and firm. Wait there, I'm busy. Her face twisted in anger as she felt rejected by Jungkook. Come out, till how much time will you guys stay there? I want to know what's happening. Just then you and Jungkook came out of the bathroom holding each other's hand. What's your problem? Who are you to say what should I do, what should I not do with my wife? Sojin's face twisted in shock, her eyes widening as she realized the truth. What? You're married to her? She asked, incredulously. Jungkook smirked, yes, and I'm glad I figured out your true intentions from the moment we met. You're not the kind of person I want to do business with. Sojin's lips curled into a snarl, but before she could say anything else, Jungkook interrupted. Goodbye, Miss Kang. I don't do business with unethical people. Now you can leave. My security will escort you out. You are rejecting my offer, right? You don't know what power I hold. I will show what I can do. She won't seriously, but it made him chuckle. I think you forget that I'm that power, but still, all the best. Sojun stood there, staring at him in disbelief, her face reddening with anger, but she knew there was nothing more she could say because she knew he was the Mafia leader who cannot be defeated easily. With a final hug, she turned and stormed out of the room. Jungkook turned to you with a grin. Well, that was fun, he said, pulling you into his arms. How about we go on a vacation, a week just for us? Your heart fluttered with excitement. I'm ready, boss, you said, grinning. Jungkook chuckled and kissed you on your forehead. Let's get away from all this and enjoy our time together. And just like that, all the tension and drama seemed to melt away, the two of you together, away from everything else. Finally, things felt right. Thank you for watching.